I mentioned in the first video that I'm a Christian, so I wanted to address in this video an argument that I hear almost exclusively from Christians, and that is, how do we handle the conflict, apparent conflict between Romans 13 verses 1 and 2 and anarchy. And they'll often throw in verses all the way through verse 7, but the crux of the argument is verse 1 and 2. I'm going to address all 7 verses. Just keep in mind, this is not an exhaustive breakdown of the verses. I'm not going to go into the original language. I'm not going to go into other scripture. This is just more an argument against the way these verses are being interpreted. And I'm going to go ahead and read these verses first. Let everyone be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. Consequently, whoever rebels against the authority is rebelling against what God has instituted, and those who do so will bring judgment on themselves. For rulers hold no terror for those who do right, but for those who do wrong. Do you want to be free from fear and from the one in authority? Then do what is right, and you will be commended. For the one in authority is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid. For rulers do not bear the sword for no reason. They are God's servants, agents of wrath to bring punishment on the wrongdoer. Therefore, it is necessary to submit to the authorities, not only because of possible punishment, but also as a matter of conscience. This is also why you pay taxes, for the authorities are God's servants who give their full time to governing. Give to everyone what you owe them. If you owe taxes, pay taxes. If revenue, then revenue. If respect, then respect. If honor, then honor. So let's take these one at a time. Verse 1, all authority over us has been established by God, and we are to submit to it. And I think that's clear enough. If a governing authority says to do something, we are to do it. Now, obviously, there are exceptions for when the governing authority tells us to do something that violates God's law, but by and large, we are to obey. So that means substance abuse laws, traffic laws, minimum wage laws, paying taxes, etc. Verse 2, since God set up the authority, rebelling against it is rebelling against God, and that makes sense. I guess that's something like the transitive property, right? If A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C. Verses 3 to 5 talk about what the government's designed to do. So, of course, as you read through the list, you'll realize that, I mean, our government today fails at a lot of that. Certainly, even more so, the government back at the time when this was written, Christians were being persecuted and killed and stoned. And so I don't think that a government failing to fulfill the purpose that has been set out for it invalidates the government. Cleon Skousen believed that it did, but I don't think the scripture bears that out, especially in other areas of scripture. So it would make the case easier if it did, but I don't think so. Verses 6 to 7, pay what you owe, including taxes. Simple enough. So, a couple of points I want to lay out in order to make my case. 1, God does not give moral sanction to immoral actions just because they are done by a government. So the Jim Crow laws from the 1870s to the 1960s were not moral because the government enacted them, and speaking out against them was not immoral just because the government was established by God. So you can disagree with the government without violating these verses. Number 2, in the United States and in most of the Western world, speaking out against the government is completely lawful and even encouraged. It's written into the Constitution that we have this right, that we're encouraged to do this. So how do I answer the question of how to resolve the conflict between Romans 13 and anarchy? I would say, what conflict? There's nothing in these verses that would prevent a Christian from being an anarchist. Anarchist philosophy doesn't dictate any sort of action. It's simply a way of viewing the world. It's a moral philosophy. I don't need to refuse to pay my taxes to be an anarchist. I just need to recognize that taxation is immoral, and I need to not advocate for it. I don't need to smoke marijuana in order to be an anarchist. I just need to recognize that actions taken to prevent someone from doing so is immoral, and not advocate for it. Scripture doesn't command us to agree with what the government is doing, or advocate for its expansion, or advocate for more of its actions. It just commands us to obey. So as a Christian, I will pay my taxes. I will obey laws. I will deal respectfully with government representatives. And I will continue to speak out against the immorality of government as an institution, and I will continue to speak out against unjust laws, and I will be in compliance with Romans 13 as I do so.